Now it's time to hear the stories of Utes in their own words. This is Utes Insider presented by Pepsi. Here's your host, Mike Legasholt.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Utes Insider presented by Pepsi. I'm Mike Legasholt. Thanks for joining us. Well, when we started this podcast, kind of the general thought was, hey, let's give some former and current athletes and coaches a place to tell their stories, to relive some good times, to share some laughs, and to give some insight on what's going on, what has been going on with Utah athletics over the years. But from time to time, I also wanted to give an opportunity to some of our staff members who work in unique roles to come on and talk about what they do. And I thought with this being the month of May, it's Mental Health Awareness Month, and also with the shutdown and really our worlds being upheaved because of the coronavirus, this would be a great time to talk about some mental health. So joining me will be Dr. Jonathan Ravarino, who joined Utah Athletics in 2015 as the first ever Director of Psychology and Wellness. And since he's come on board, his staff has grown. They are working tremendous hours, even before the coronavirus pandemic came upon us. And they've certainly faced their share of challenges the past 8 to 10 weeks trying to help student athletes and coaches who are no longer together, who have been sent home, who are working from home. They tried to help staff members deal with this current situation. Just a lot of demands have been put on Jonathan and his staff, and I thought it'd be great to bring him on to talk about sort of his role, how he's grown this area of the Utah Athletics student athlete support staff, what his staff does on a daily basis in normal times, and how they've been dealing with things the past couple of months, and also maybe share some advice on how to help everyone, whether you're an accountant or an electrician or just a stay-at-home mom who now has a spouse who's also home with you and kids who aren't in school, just how to help people maybe deal with this current situation and get through it. So Jonathan will come along and give us his thoughts. Should be a good conversation. Jonathan Ravarino, our guest on Utes Insider presented by Pepsi, coming up in just a moment.
To hear more episodes of this show and other Utah Athletics podcasts, search for them on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. Now back to more of Utes Insider presented by Pepsi.
Well, I'm pleased to be joined by a man who has been extremely busy the last 8 to 10 weeks with the coronavirus shutdown and all of Utah student athletes being sent home and coaches and staff working remotely. A challenging time for all of us, but Jonathan Ravarino, who is Utah Athletics Director of Psychology and Wellness, is joining us. And, you know, Jonathan, I'm having you on for a couple reasons. One, I want to bring some light to what it is you and your staff do, but it's also Mental Health Awareness Month of May. I thought that'd be a great time. And just with everything going on, I thought there's a lot of topics we can hit on that kind of get us away from sports and kind of the feel-good stories, but maybe this show could be more of a self-help show. So, John, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. I appreciate you having me on.
Well, let's first of all get into your background a little bit. You joined the U Athletics Department in 2015 as the Director of Psychology and Wellness, and since then, I'm not surprised that they realized your role would be so valuable and needed that the area has grown, and now you have some people who assist you in this area. So maybe just talk about sort of your staff and what you do on a daily basis to get things rolling here.
Sure. Yeah, it has grown since 2015, and that's not unique to Utah. I think if you look across the country, particularly at D1 and Power 5 schools, all of us have at least one psychologist or mental health professional in a position, either in athletics or within the campus, that's working with student athletes. It's a unique population. It requires some cultural competence to understand elite athletes and family systems and multicultural issues and power issues related to coaching and elite athletes. And so a lot of schools have noticed that. And then when it comes to the mental health of these athletes, they're just, in some ways, they have similar concerns as the general student, but they also have all the pressures of elite athletic demands. And so with each year almost, it seems like we either add an intern or we add another psychologist. So right now we have 3 psychologists, including myself, in 2020. And that took some work in terms of building up a respect for psychology and wellness within the staff, in terms of its added value to the department, with the coaches, its added value to the performance of these athletes, to their bottom line of having a strong team. And we've incorporated psychology interns to train with us, folks who want to become psychologists in sport and elite performance. And right now we have 2 interns and 3 psychologists. And we're multicultural in scope and in practice and in ethnicity and gender. So we really mirror, if you will, the student athlete population, which is important.
It sure is. And from what I've heard, as much as your staff has grown, it's almost not big enough with the demands you and your staff are facing. We'll get into more of that in just a bit. But, Jonathan, looking at your background, you worked at 3 universities in counseling at Duke and UNC Greensboro, and also at the U of U from 2010 to 2015 before transferring to athletics. I know you're an avid triathlete and compete yourself. Was getting into athletics and working with collegiate student athletes always sort of your goal when you got into this profession?
Well, it wasn't the initial goal, but just working with college student mental health, the age of 18, if you will, to 24,
right,
and graduate students. That's always been kind of my area of specialty, if you will. And then because of some of my interests in just athletics, my background in athletics, my current just interest in running and the triathlons, it just was always interested in working with athletes. And so I kind of shifted over to the athletic departments specifically, but I've always loved working at University of Utah. Universities just more generally have been where I think I'm most helpful. I also teach in the College of Social Work, teach graduate students. So I just it's kind of a home. Grew up in Salt Lake, so being at the University of Utah very much fits the trajectory that I was hoping to be on. But and I like college sports probably more so than professional.
Is that right?
Just because of the team culture and the building.
Yeah.
Of the changing constellation of teams from freshman to senior. So it's always a moving kind of team, which is wonderful. So,
yep.
But we're all over the place from high school to college to professional. The psychologists are starting to have a role.
It's been interesting at the U especially, and I know our move to the Pac-12 has increased our budget, which has been great. But I think departments all over the country, as you mentioned, are looking to find ways to take better care of the student athletes, whether it's nutrition or strength and conditioning or training, sports medicine. Mental health is part of that. And so I think at the U of U, just kind of the general trend plus the increase in funding and really elevating everything with the move to the Pac-12 has led to tremendous growth in your area. But just in general terms, what is it that you see going on? You mentioned the high school level and in various areas. Why there's been such an explosion of growth in psychology and wellness and mental health as we look to develop athletes, and it's really happened in the last 5 or 10 years. What's led to that, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, if I can, I'll answer that just in a minute, but I would be remiss if I did mention that, with respect to the funding changes and the moving into a bigger conference like the Pac-12, I do want to give quite a bit of credit to sort of the administration who had the forethought. I think there have been some established sports psychology, programs in the country, but they're kind of few and far between. They're more consistent now, but back in 2015, when you think of the awareness of, Dr. Chris Hill, our previous athletic director, and Kyle Brennan, and then my direct boss, Nona Richardson, I think I was her first hire as a senior woman administrator.
Yeah.
To bring in someone who could at least, if it wasn't me, it would have been someone else, just someone who could manage some of the mental health needs, because they were just increasingly getting more and more demanding of all the staff, and people were starting to, as untrained mental health professionals, try to manage situations that have a medical flavor to it. And then, so that was really some good forethought. And then with the retirement of Dr. Chris Hill and then Mark Harlan coming on board, I mean, just since he's been our head, I mean, he's hired 2 more psychologists. So it started with Chris, it is now with Mark and Kyle, and Nona's still here. So I think it's sort of that build it and they will come. I mean, as we've had an office and we are in the athletic department, you know, athletes really don't like visitors very much. They like people in their community that can help them and that know them and that respect what they do, from 5 a.m. workouts to 10 p.m., you know, studying. So I think that being in the department and growing the staff has allowed more and more of them to come out and be open with us. But some say that the health and wellness of our student athletes has always been a concern, but not until we had an actual office would they start to come out and talk about their stuff. And if you look at research on just mental health statistics across decades, I mean, college students do tend to struggle with the same concerns each year of anxiety and depression and challenging relationships. And am I measuring up to standards? And it's just, complicated with student athletes. So you could think that it's always kind of been there. And some of our coaches who used to be athletes, they wonder themselves, like, was it always this much of a problem?
Right.
And it's hard to know, but
yeah.
But right now, every university athletic department is having to wrestle with the health and wellness of their athletes, and it's just now the norm that you provide medical care, athletic training, and nutrition, and also attend to their health and wellness and mental health.
Yeah,
so we're trying to do that.
Yep, you make some great points there. I want to get into as we dig into the meat of this conversation. But you're right, in terms of funding being available, it's one thing to have, but it's another thing to decide where to spend it and to make the decision to grow this area. By Dr. Chris Hill, by Mark Harlan, and Nona Richardson, they've had some great foresight and really getting this thing going. And it's not that there weren't people helping U of U athletes before you arrived. Dr. Keith Tension was, one of the pioneers in this profession. I've talked to several gymnasts going back to the 90s and under Greg Marsden who utilized his services and felt it helped tremendously. So it's not as though it wasn't being done. It just wasn't being done at the level that it is now by the number of people, and having yourself and your staff embedded, as you said, in the department. There's this level of trust, I think, that's evolving, that has been a good thing. It's more just a drop by, say hello, and there's some comfort level that maybe wasn't there before that's really helped. But obviously, Jonathan, your role has changed in the last 8 to 10 weeks. Everyone's off campus, and there's a lot of challenges with this current situation. But let's kind of go back to what your normal day was like before the past couple of months. Just talk about sort of the structure of your week in terms of appointments, just maybe trying to find a way to be around our student athletes and interact with them and pick up on things. What's kind of has been your normal workflow before this current situation crept up on us?
Yeah, the normal workflow is, each of my team, we have, the other 2 psychologists and myself. Our interns kind of work within some of our practice too, but each of us have specific sport teams we work with. I work with football and basketball and lacrosse. My other psychologists work with their respective teams. And we basically just are doing our best to provide education, mental health, individual counseling to student athletes. It's all confidential. It's all free of charge. It's all readily available and accessible within their schedule. Our schedule would usually look like in the morning, we would see clients for 30 minutes to an hour. Again, confidential, working on anything from relationship distress, family concerns, grief, to thoughts of not wanting to play their sport, thoughts of depression, lots of anxiety, which is just excessive worry that keeps people up at night.
Yep.
That affects their whole, musculoskeletal system, their level of ease and calmness throughout the day. So we'd work with that. We'd use things like mindfulness meditation. We'd teach kids how to calm their bodies. We'd show up to practice to, also see them in their element, and if they needed support. If the coaches need a support, we could give them any consultation on team stuff, concerns, and just kind of pop in and out of different offices to give consultation to academics, to touch base with strength and conditioning, just because everyone's got their eyes and ears open to kids in distress, and being around and available allows them to communicate their concerns to us. And we would always keep in confidence anything a student told us, but we can always take information from other staff if they're concerned about an athlete, and then we might reach out to the athlete. So that's kind of how it looked. We don't do a lot of travel with the teams just because, it's not as effective as just doing it while they're here in residence. And then we have multiple teams to work with, so it's kind of hard to just travel with one team.
Right. You bring up
that's all changed, Mike.
It sure has. Sorry. It sure has. You bring up a great point before I want to get to kind of the current situation, but you'll hear from people who have dealt with people dealing with mental health issues, and they'll say, hey, the individual a lot of times doesn't want to come forward. There's a stigmatism. It's hard to initiate that and say, hey, I've got a problem. I need some help. But the people around those individuals are the ones who oftentimes can get things started and be the ones to say, hey, I'm worried about you, or go to someone like yourself and say, I'm worried about so-and-so. If you can, maybe just talk about how that process works, and maybe some success stories where it's been an individual who's come to you and said, hey, can you talk to so-and-so, or I'm worried about them, that sort of alerted you to something, and you and your staff were able to help those people in the end.
Yeah, it happens more than you'd think. And I think that's not anything like mental health will probably always carry a stigma. It's just, unfortunately, we've come great lengths, and when I was a kid, and we'll probably be further along in the future, but just the idea of someone struggling internally in the quiet of their mind with something, and just particularly in a culture like sports culture where it's just kind of, grin and bear, deal with it, kind of, wipe it off, get up, you're fine. Some of those messages are still being, part of the sports culture. And so when it comes to struggle, some of these kids have a hard time turning that off, and they just try to, not be weak or not show any signs of struggle. So when you have relationships with academic advisors and learning specialists and just all the staff who have relationships with these kids, if they can have their ears and eyes open for just evidence of decompensation or struggle or depression, or just you're talking about academics and the kid starts to cry or just gets really quiet and withdrawn, if they have those awareness of those signs, and they can use their relationship as leverage, so to speak, to like, hey, would you just be willing to talk with Uma or Clint or Jonathan? And if they can get them in the door, we tend to be pretty good at keeping them, because they see that, oh, this was helpful. And then the good thing, Mike, also is that they can always use the language of, I'm just seeing a sports psychologist to work on my game.
Right.
And
right.
No one needs to know if it's more than that, if it's some depression, if it's, abuse from their past. But, sure, we're helping them with their game. But the thing is, like, sports affects mental health affects sports. So it's all intertwined. And we have the luxury of being in athletics and being someone you can go to for mental performance, if you will. So that's helping. Some of the success stories involve a kid coming in not even really knowing that they're struggling with something like anxiety, think they're just, not cut out compared to their peers, and then helping them develop, just a skill set to quiet their mind, to regulate their anxiety level, to be more calm in the face of challenge, which transfers onto the volleyball court, onto the softball field, football field, and then all of a sudden the performance goes up, and they're an All-American. And we've helped everyone from All-Americans to people who, struggle every day, but it makes sense to stay on the team, but they struggle with it. So it's not just the one not getting time in the game that comes to us. It's the one that wants to make the NFL and get even better mindset to deal with 2 interceptions in a row, for example.
Yep.
How do you stay mentally tough. And, that's a wonderful place to be, to help people that are courageous to come and talk with someone. So,
yeah, you bring up a good word there, courageous, because it's hard for people to kind of take that first step, or to have someone nudge them to take that first step. Visiting with Dr. Jonathan Ravarino, who is the Director of Psychology and Wellness for Utah Athletics. And, Jonathan, obviously everyone's world has changed. Everyone's workflow has changed the last 8 to 10 weeks with the coronavirus shutdown. We went from having teams on the floor in Las Vegas at the men's basketball tournament on a Wednesday night to, by Friday, we're shutting it down. And careers came to an end, even with seniors who have been given that extra year. Some already have jobs lined up where they're just like, you know what, I'm at a point where I'm ready to be done. And even if you can go back next year, you really can't go back and ever create what you lost. I mean,
that's right.
2020 will always be gone, no matter if you come back for 2021. So it's just been a crazy time for all of us. The word you keep hearing is unprecedented. And my thought is, well, there's no question it's unprecedented. It's almost at what level of unprecedentedness, if that's a word, it is. And it's really causing a lot of problems for a lot of people, and just the suddenness of it, because it just kind of came upon us so quickly. Since mid-March, I mean, student athletes have been sent home. Coaches who are used to being around their kids and their staff are working from home, and they like being in control and having that interaction, and they can't have it anymore except through telephone calls and Zoom and text and email. It's really been a change for everyone. Jonathan, if you can just talk about some of the challenges you've faced trying to help Utah athletes and coaches through the past couple of months.
Yeah, Mike, it has been challenging for sure. In fact, I was with the men's basketball team at the Pac-12s. When that was canceled and we all went home after Alfonso Plummer made 11 threes. My goodness, what a game.
Game. And who knew that a day later how much things would change.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And it's been very rapid, and March was just at an accelerated rate that none of us could even catch up to. April kept a lot of that pace, but slowed down a bit toward the end. And May feels a little bit different than April. And, only to say we're human, we adapt. One of our greatest evolutionary traits is that we can be flexible with our mindset and, understand the circumstances we're in and adapt. And athletes are the best at that. I mean, they're constantly having to adapt to different scores, to I get time, now I don't get time, to, weather challenges in a game. So what we try to do is, while also respecting that this is tough and difficult and unprecedented for everyone, we're also trying to remind these athletes that they do have the tools to deal with uncertainty. They have very strong mindsets. This is an opportunity to learn patience. The coaches in particular, I mean, they're out recruiting. They've been slowed down to a trickle in terms of some of the things they could do during these times. Some seasons were just, like you said, ended, especially gymnastics.
Yeah.
There was probably, certainly on a path to win a national championship. They were just phenomenal.
Yeah, they were right on
peaking at the right time.
You're right. Yep.
Totally. So, and all of them were softball, baseball. I don't want to lacrosse, but it really just honoring the fact that some of these kids' seasons and careers were over that night or that day when everything changed, and then just the fact that these students were asked to go home and to not be around their teams, to connect. And these kids, they connect, like they really enjoy connecting. They do it a little different, mostly through social media, than some of us when we were younger, where it was all just face to face. So in another way, this student population was a little bit prepared to deal with this distancing because they have these social media accounts, they connect with each other, but still very, very hard. And I think all of us have faced that. And my staff, we've had to adapt. We have had to create a whole telepsychology platform. We don't do Zoom meetings originally to do telemedicine and psychology. The research is pretty clear that the best form is to do it face-to-face in an office, sitting with them to pick up the nuances, to demonstrate rapport, all that.
Yeah.
So we've had to adapt. We can't just not provide services, and we reached out to people, and we've maintained caseloads throughout this and new caseloads. A lot of these kids have struggled going back home. Home is not a real lovely place for some, and for others, it's what they've wanted for months and months, is to just be back with their families and a little bit of reprieve from all this stress. So every situation's different, Mike, and now we're going to deal, as everyone kind of slowly comes back, hopefully, what it's like to reacclimatize and get back into this intense schedule, which is the life of a student athlete.
Yeah. And there's a lot of great unknowns about what's ahead of us. There's some things you go through and you say, well, there's an end in sight, and we know how it's kind of going to end and what it's going to be like when we get there. And with this thing, so many unknowns, like I said, that's really, I think, has multiplied the anxiety level within people, just a number of unknowns. One thing you mentioned to me, Jonathan, I've always felt this as well, is personal relationships are so valuable. And it's one thing to email back and forth or even talk over the phone, but to sit down with someone in person and sense where they are and body language and really kind of connect with someone. Like you said, you have lost that aspect of what you do. And at the same time, you're trying to get an accurate assessment of where people are and help them. How challenging has that aspect of this been for you the past couple of months?
It has been challenging. But I also think, you do with what you have. And if you're waiting for people to kind of just come back, you're going to have to start your office all over again, so to speak. Yeah. And so you try to continue to reach out to people who have been in current, work with us in terms of therapy clients. Some people who might have been in the past working with us, we want to check in with them again. How are you doing? And then kids who've never had, so to speak, mental health concerns, we don't want to assume they're fine. And so just kind of reaching out to people, but also not bugging them, or assuming that they're not going to be able to handle this. But a lot of normalizing of it is hard. And, we'll prefer when they come back to meet with them in person. I jump on a lot of team meetings, sort of by request of coaches, or I just kind of invite myself, so to speak, just to check in with the athletes. And just normalize. And the more I have relationships with these kids, they're better able to be like, hey, can I touch base with you? And then all of a sudden I learn, they haven't slept for 2 days, and
wow,
and they're struggling more than anyone would know, because it's hard for an athlete to tell their coach, I'm struggling, because in their mind, even if it's not accurate, and our coaches are great in terms of not stigmatizing mental health and knowing that if someone sees us in our office, it doesn't mean they're weak or they're fragile or incapable. They're just going through a hard time, just like our coaches go through hard times. So, but the athlete is thinking, if I tell my coach I'm struggling, he may not start me, or she may not bring me on this road trip. And I don't want that to happen. So I'll just, grin and bear it. So that's where the confidentiality piece of our work and having a relationship where we can sit down with them and just give them a space for them to be authentic and real, whatever that looks like.
Right.
And then let's figure it out. Do you feel comfortable to tell your trainer? Would you want to talk to your parents about this? Do you think you could talk to your coach? And we just follow their lead, and we don't get put on pressure by administration or any of the coaches, like, tell me, what do you think about this or that? They just respect that we have a piece to the puzzle, and we want these kids to be healthy and well, and success and wins usually come after that.
They sure do. Working around college athletes and coaches, as long as I have, obviously, to get to this point, they've had success. And I think when you do things and you have success, those two things go together, and you kind of feel like I've got control over things, and you feel like I have confidence in my ability to control things. And even after a loss, Jonathan, there's this mentality that, well, there's always the next game, or there's always tomorrow, or there's another practice or another game. And if the end is in sight, whether you're a senior in your final week and you're in NCAA tournament action and okay, if we lose this game, our team's done, I'm done. You normally see the end coming. And with this situation, the end came and none of us really saw it coming. So I would think
right.
that's been something that's really messed with some people, because you have people who are normally in control and have some self-confidence or confidence in general because of that feeling of control, who have now lost it. How have you helped people deal with that the past couple of months?
Yeah, we've just honored it in terms of like help them look at it like through a grief model, like you're grieving the loss of something, which is your sport and how you wanted that to go. What's interesting is if it happened to just one team, it would be probably worse than it happened to the entire country.
Okay.
So the fact that it happens to everybody, kind of like we're all going through this. So it's not like just one team was lifted and not allowed to perform anymore or suspended, your season's over. It's every single athlete in our department. So there was a level of like normalization and universality to this that I think helped in some ways. And everyone just needed to recognize that, almost being, fortunate that, wow, like we got to play at least one game at the Pac-12 tournament, or look how far we got this season with gymnastics, or, there was a level of just gratitude for what we were able to do. But initially there was a lot of just sad student athletes, and we looked at it through the model of like grief and loss, and you weren't ready to be done. And this was unexpected loss in your life. And it makes sense that you have tears or you're angry, or you don't know what to do and you're just mad. Or maybe you think this was an overreaction because you just can't wrap your mind around the enormity of campuses closing, NBA closing, Olympics postponed. I mean, this is unprecedented.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, like everything changed almost within 72 hours. You
make a great point. We're all in this together, and that's been voiced so many different ways through the media and just conversation with people. And yes, we're all in this together, whether you live in Utah or New York or California. It's different in some spots, but we're all in this together. And that certainly, I think, has helped everyone cope as you have conversations, whether you're an athlete or a coach or someone who's an accountant who is now working from home. But the other thing that's happened to all of us is this loss of routine. And I think there's comfort in routine for everyone, and that's been taken away. Have you found that to be a major challenge for the people you deal with the past couple of months?
It's an enormous challenge. I mean, one of the common things happening was, particularly our student athletes, I'm sure some of this parallels us as adults in terms of like the coaching staff and the staff more generally. But, when you have an entire day planned out and you know where you're going at 5:30, at 9 a.m., at noon, when practice is, when study hall is, you just kind of on automatic pilot, you go to these places and you do your thing. And at the end of the day, you've done a tremendous amount of working out. You had really good food. You had great study sessions, and now you just want to socialize. And then you put these kids away from all that. I mean, there was a lot, and there probably still is, just some lack of motivation, like not sure what to do, how to spend my day, when to go to bed, when I should eat, and a little bit of boredom, because they weren't entirely in charge of their schedule like they are now. And so some of that's a learning and a lesson in that. And this is adults, we all have to figure that out. But it happened with the staff of just routine of going into work, parking, and doing your thing, to now I have 2 kids at home and a wife, and it's like trying to wrestle the multiple responsibilities is a challenge and a joy at the same time,
Right.
Like, and if you have a mindset that like, let me take this as an opportunity to connect with my kids, it's never going to happen again. It's not a vacation, certainly, but it's these little pockets of being able to see my kids and be a little bit of a teacher and dad at the same time. Then it helps get through the day. But, it's different for every person in every situation. I think people who don't have the same big families, I think it's particularly challenging, just being alone in an apartment or, not being able to return. We have some international students who can't go back to places like Italy, can't go back to, Europe because of, concerns about coming back on their visa and whatnot. And so they had to make some difficult decisions on, I should stay in the States because I might not get back.
Yeah.
So routine for sure, Mike.
Yeah.
And that'll continue to be when we go back, people are going to probably struggle with routine.
Right.
Because
the adjustment going back to where we were is going to be a challenge. No question.
Yeah.
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 No, you bring up a great point. I mean, you and I are fathers, and we've become science and mathematics teachers. We hadn't planned on that for the month of April and May, and I'm not sure how well I've executed in that area.
Yeah.
And the challenge,
seriously?
Yeah, the kids has been great, and then you have this other set of people who are single and not married, and isolation, and there's challenges for all of us. And I want to get into some of that as we wrap things up, and maybe you can share some advice for everyone outside of athletics dealing with this current situation. And I'll get back to our athletes in a moment. We've spent a lot of time talking about kind of the current climate we're in the past couple of months with the coronavirus shutdown. But, Jonathan, before we go into that, I want to talk to you more about college athletes in general. And one of the things I hear from people and see from people when they interact with college athletes is this mindset, oh my gosh, these people have it made. They're college athletes and they're competing in the Pac-12, and some of them are on full ride scholarships, and they've made it. They've done all this, and look where they are, and they think life is just so wonderful. And there's a lot of great things about being a college athlete, but there's also this aspect, a couple things actually. One is the pressure to continue doing well. I mean, now there's a lot more riding on the line than there was when you were the standout athlete in high school. So that's a challenge for some. And others deal with this aspect of, I used to be the best athlete on my team, and I thought I was really, really good. And now I'm in college, and I'm in the Pac-12, and I'm not the best on my team anymore. And this idea that I might play in the pros or start in the Pac-12 isn't panning out. And so there's a couple of things for college athletes, and there's kind of a middle ground as well, where I guess my point is I think there's a lot more challenges for college athletes than people realize, with anxiety and stress and expectations and failure that they maybe haven't dealt with until they got to college. If you can, maybe just talk about some of the things you've dealt with and some ways you've maybe helped athletes through those situations.
Well, you're right. You're right about all that. And ultimately, one thing that hasn't been mentioned, and I'm not putting anything on parents, but parents, when it comes to their hopes and dreams for their kids, it can oftentimes be just kind of instilled in the kid. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these kids that are D1 athletes, and in particular at University of Utah, have parents and communities and neighborhoods that are invested in how well they do and how they do. And some of them are wearing some of the gear that they've worn, and they, have the opportunity to celebrate University of Utah athletics. So it becomes this, I have to do this.
Right.
In addition to I wanted to do this. And sometimes it's hard to tease out those two for these, age appropriate, what do I want to do with my life? And for some, they loved high school and they're still loving college, but for some, they struggle with that, and they're still really good at their sport, but they're not entirely sure they love it anymore. And just trying to help them recognize that that's okay, and you don't have to go pro. I've worked with football players who made it to the pros and retired almost immediately. Just no, I don't want to do this. I made it. That was my goal, to actually be, at that point.
Right.
And it doesn't necessarily want to keep pushing my body. And then we've worked with skiers who already went to the pros, so to speak, Olympics. Now college is on the backside of that, so they've already had their greatest success. And so it's just different with every kid, and they have family systems and fans and people that are in their corner that are invested, and that's my point. And that's a lot of pressure, and that's different, I think, than when it was a while back, a decade or 2 decades ago, and even more different now that we're in the Pac-12, so which we've been in for 11 years. So we recruit really, really the highest athletes. Every team has the best player from probably their region or conference as kids. So in that way, there really is a healthy competition in these collegiate teams, and The coaches are great at kind of making people feel validated and worthy and important, even in a supporting role on the bench. And when that's difficult, they help each other, and they're friends first and teammates second. So, at the end of the day, like most athletes, the research shows they'd rather win than be the best on their team. So if they're winning the game and they're not necessarily contributing full time to that win, if the team wins, that feels more of a success in research than, being the highest scorer or being the best on your team, but not winning. So we've had a lot of winning programs at the U. So I think that University of Utah is doing pretty good with that. But it is challenging for sure. And same with the coaching staff. I mean, they have their hands full with these athletes coming back and creating a culture of post-COVID success,
Yep. No, that'll
none of us will know,
that'll be the next phase for us once we get through this where we are right now. Visiting with Dr. Jonathan Ravarino, Director of Psychology and Wellness for University of Utah Athletics. Jonathan, you mentioned the parents, and that leads me to something I want to get into with you. I've seen it. I have a son who's playing sports, and the amount of time and effort parents put into youth sports at a very young age now, whether it's gymnastics at a club, playing travel baseball, travel soccer, travel this, travel that. It's crazy the amount of time and effort that goes into youth sports. I think it's great for the kids to have those opportunities and the benefits from it. But like you said, there also comes pressure. And you have parents who feel like, well, if I spend the money and put the time in, Johnny or Jane's going to be a Division I athlete and get a scholarship, or they might go pro, and or someone who maybe hasn't necessarily invested money but sees their son or daughter as a chance to really change the financial path of a family with professional sports. There's a lot of pressure on these kids coming to college, and I think sometimes the student athletes get it. They know where they are. They see this, but mom and dad and family members maybe don't. And so I would think part of the challenges would be, you and your role really can't talk to mom and dad and family, but you can help the athletes deal with mom and dad and family. What are some pointers you've given to student athletes who are kind of like, hey, listen, I get it. I know that this isn't going to happen for me the way we maybe in my family thought it would. How do you help them maybe have conversations that are pretty real with family members?
Yeah, it's challenging. Usually that's one of the most difficult, sometimes even harder to deal with their teammates or their coach, is just not feeling like they're letting down family or parents.
Yeah.
And it's tricky, right? Because we know sports is just phenomenal for the development of a kid because of learning the team identity and we versus me and just the adversity and win and losses. And, just competition is good, like in terms of learning to be your best and to win and lose. But that's good for everybody. And, that doesn't necessarily mean that, you're going to love it the rest of your life and you're going to continue to succeed at the same level. So I think parents, it's all well-meaning, and it's, but questions like, for kids, how do I know if my kid should practice more? Or how do I know if, I'm pushing too hard? And sometimes what I'll say to parents is just this idea of, if they're playing tennis, for example, or basketball or whatever, just, on a day when they don't have practice, don't go push them to go play. Just put the tennis racket in the living room or just have the basketball right there. And if they pick it up themselves and go practice, then that means they wanted to practice more, but don't push it because this should be coming from them first.
Right.
And, but it's difficult when you want to do right by your kids and they love sports and you love sports. And, but it tends to not, it often doesn't look like what you think it will look like. It looks a little bit different. Success is not a straight line. It's a lot of curves, but hopefully upward trajectory, and helping them develop the language to talk with their parents. Whether it's during season, like, hey, can you just get off my back a little bit? Like, this isn't helping me. Just try to be supportive. Like, or at the end of the season, like, let's just sit down and this is how it felt this year. I felt like each game I wasn't doing enough for you, and just having conversations like that are tough with parents, but usually parents can hear it and they're very open about it, and they just love their kids, so they'll do anything they can. And a lot of them are athletes themselves.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, we believe these are young adults. They make the decision. We'll help them. We don't have a skin in the game. Like, I don't really, really, really care if they win or lose. I care as an athletics staff, but I just want them to be healthy, and be the best versions of themselves. So
yeah, you make
that's a little bit different.
Yep. I didn't mean to generalize, because there are a lot of parents who are tremendous, and they are former athletes, and they get it. Yeah, so I don't want to throw them all into the same category, because that's not the case at all. But, Jonathan, I want to dig into Generation Z a little bit with you here, the current college athletes we have, and the sort of, give some characteristics of this group of people. They've had what they call snowplow parents a little bit, parents who've kind of been paving the way and done a lot for their kids. And it's been hard sometimes for mom and dad to see the kids suffer. So, and sometimes mom and dad have the means to help out and can't resist. So that's been a little bit of it with this generation. Also, they're very into electronics, and the way they communicate is not face to face. It's someone standing next to you and you send a text message type of thing, And so in some ways they've been pretty well equipped to deal with this current situation where we have less social interaction, because they are already on their own doing that. But at the same time, sometimes change can be tough for this group of 20-year-olds or, late teens to 20-year-old kids who are dealing with a lot of changes and upheaval. So I guess in your role, how have you looked at this particular age group that you deal with as college athletes, and what are some things you've done to help them that might be unique to this generation?
Well, yeah, it is a unique generation, but it's hard because these student athletes now, with the competitive nature of Pac-12 and U of U, we're getting them from everywhere, from internationally to Alaska to Florida to everywhere. So it really is culturally diverse to the extent that they never look the same.
Yeah.
And some sports, sometimes the best indicator is looking at a specific sport like volleyball. How are these athletes similar? And what are some of the trends that come from club volleyball or football, for example? And yeah, it's a little bit of a generation that's high in technology and low in connection. They'd rather text than talk. They'd rather break up on a text than face to face. Some of them don't have license. Why get a license?
Right.
Someone will bring me.
There's Uber. There's all these things.
There's Uber.
Yeah. Why get a license? Yeah. Absolutely. To me, that was just so crazy when I heard some of them talk about that. And for them, it's like, well, this is just how I should do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, just pretty, smart kids too. We have really good academic performance in terms of our student athletes. And so I think these are sophisticated kids, and I think they read through situations, and they're all coming from club teams and high performing high school situations. So I think they really pay attention well. They work hard, but yeah, there tends to be a little bit of this might be partly because of the parents or the snowplowing phenomenon you mentioned, but just kind of like, okay, I did my piece, so where's my kind of rewards here? Mm-hmm. And that's, coaches are good at helping. That's kind of their repertoire, keeping people motivated and what are you working for? And, nothing comes easy. And, I think that where it's a challenge is where these kids are ill prepared emotionally, even though they're physically well developed, and they're, so you see a 6'5" athlete walking down the hallway that presumably you would think is pretty, as I said, developed, but emotionally they're pretty underdeveloped. And, helping them with that and being patient with that is something that my office is particularly keen to. But that's something that all these coaches have to do. They have to not baby them, but they just really have to stay connected with them.
Right.
Because need a little bit more validation, a little bit, how am I doing, coach, than maybe a couple decades ago. But the coaches are there to do it. I mean, they deeply do care. They recruit these kids. They tell the parents what they'll do for them, and then they put their money where their mouth is. Not their money, but their effort where their mouth is, and they stay connected to these athletes, whether or not they're winning or losing. And if they need help from our end, they reach out. And I mean, from the top sort of speak coach in our department, in terms of like just high profile, let's say, to kind of the newest kind of coach that comes in just hired. I mean, they have a respect for health, wellness, mental health services. So that's really fortunate here. I don't know if that's the case across the country, but it is in Utah. And that's why I love working here.
Well, you've done some
from the top down.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You've done some great work, you and your staff, and certainly some long hours the past couple of months. You brought up a great point. Grandparents might look at these 18 and 20-year-olds and kind of question, why are they doing this or why are they not doing that? And I think this Generation Z, maybe questions more than any other generation in terms of what are we doing and why. And it's not like I'm going to do this just because my parents did this or my older brother and sister did this. They really question what they're doing and why. And they're very in tune with what's going on around them. So, that's been some of the positives that I've noticed with this group of people in their late teens, early 20s that have been really good. I think the next thing is, we talked about Generation Z, and some people have said it could be 1 to 2 years after this pandemic has passed before they get back to normal. I mean, just the upheaval, the anxiety, the uncertainty of what's going on. I mean, these people are in college gearing up for careers that might not be there. Jobs that they thought would be there when they graduate in a year might not be there. A lot of things have changed for them to really unsettle their worlds. What have you found with this group in terms of, as they look towards the future and when we do get through this global pandemic of the coronavirus, what's their outlook on things in the next in a year or two in terms of where they end up and how this current situation could impact their future?
Well, in no disrespect to our athletes and athletes more generally, Mike, I don't think they're really thinking about it as much as some of the older population of adults are with respect to like, am I going to get that job? I think they're probably still confident that they will graduate, get the job they want. They believe in themselves. They're not fully in the professional world yet to see the real realities.
Yeah.
And sometimes, for better or worse, I mean, they tend to look at the next day and what's after that instead of the next year and 2 years down the road. And a lot of these kids, their whole focus was getting to college and get their scholarship and to be a D1 athlete. And so sometimes they didn't even look past college. And so helping them and academic staff do the best job at this, like, what do you really want to major in? Is this really what you want to do? And it sounds like while you're good at writing papers, you really have a desire to be in finance or business. And so they can help tease that out and then gear them toward that. But those are going to be the conversations that we have with these, through our personal development office with Ashley Lear and Kendall Pond. These are two that are trying to help them look at job prospects and opportunities. And the stark realities, I don't know if they're really going to notice them until they put their CV out or resume and they get no calls, or they get a call or two and then halfway through the interview process, funding's pulled for the position.
Yeah.
And so that's the kind of realities they're going to deal with. But I don't think I think they're just thinking about, where's my friends?
Yep.
When's my school going to start? And where am I going to live? When's the fueling stations open? What's my life going to be like? And is my family healthy? I don't know if they're thinking as much about, and that's not a bad thing either.
It's not,
probably,
no.
Some people think too much about the next 7 years, but it's going to be challenging, and we'll probably get some calls from some former athletes. This is a lot harder than I thought. I'd like to actually go see someone, and do you have a referral? And I'm sure that's going to come, like future mental health referrals. So you're right about the curve on this will probably be about 1 or 2 years around the mental health readjustment. And that's best case scenario if we all come back. But it's hard to know right now, but living in the moment sometimes is good, right? For
Absolutely.
health and wellness, but sometimes it's good to have some thought about the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, you sort of wonder, and they don't know really where their mindset is. I mean, as adults look at it and they kind of study things, they might be thinking, well, this is a major concern, whereas the truth is that they're really not thinking about it, but at least right now. But I saw another number that, Generation Z, they communicate with their parents around, 68 to 73% communicate with mom and dad once a day. Which to me seemed kind of high. I know some people go to college and they're just like, I'm on my own and I'm doing my own thing. And it's almost like mom and dad have to beg them to make a phone call home. And this particular group is very connected to their parents. And I'm guessing, I'm assuming too much, but once they come back from all this, that number could be even higher. I mean, and just the upheaval and the insecurities and the unknowns. I mean, you talk about anxiety, depression, OCD, that's all been exacerbated by this current situation. So I guess as we you look down the road, Jonathan, how do you start preparing, our current student athletes for the future and coming back to campus and kind of this wondering, well, hey, we may go back in the fall, but there could be a second or third wave that's even worse than what we experienced in the spring of 2020, and that can cause more anxiety. How do you, as you kind of, we turn to this next phase of coming back to campus life on some level in sports, how do you help gear them up for what's coming next?
Well, I think in some ways we may find that Generation Z is the most adaptable generation we've had because, the carpet was pulled from right underneath them. And they fell right down. Everyone fell. No one was there to catch them. We all didn't have the answers. We still arguably don't have the answers. But so they might hit, in 10 to 20 years from now, this might be an incredibly pivotal moment like it was when, I remember when 9/11 happened and where I was. And that was 20 years ago and, just shy of 20. So that was pivotal in terms of safety and feelings of safety within this country. And I think the same might be true with this around our health and our wellness. And, I think exercise more generally across the country is up and everyone is thinking more about how do I take care of my health and wellness. And so these athletes coming back, I mean, what we're going to try to help them do is recognize that, they can adapt. They are adapting. They have adapted. Flexibility of mind and behavior, being able to adapt to this new normal, so to speak, is what we're going to ask of them. And they need to go slow and patient with themselves. And we're asking the coaches to be, coaches, but also be patient and, give everybody some time because it's going to look different with each kid. Some kids are just, can I come back right now, please? And some are like, you know what, this is pretty sweet. I'm in no hurry. And they're not going to tell their coach that, but they'll tell us that. And that's normal because that's probably how every, business, large business or large groups are, some are feeling it different and some are more ready and able to come back. So I think, kind of like our schedule as staff, it might not look the same as it did in February. We might not be as immediately productive, just like we weren't when we were all at home initially, but we found our groove. We're adapting because we're resilient and just helping them recognize they have the tools. And then emotions are going to, one of the biggest things we try to teach is have your emotions or they'll have you. And, what we mean by that is your emotions are going to come whether you like it or not. And you just need to give them space and they will peak and pass. They won't destroy you. What will create more of a problem is you trying to hold back and try to not have your emotion. And so giving them space to have their emotions, to normalize any emotion they have, from fear to anxiety to excitement and joy and pleasure to be back, all that. And then get back into some routine, like the lifting session might look different. The practice might be more about connecting and, thermometer testing by the athletic trainer than, just running and tackling each other. So it's just going to look different. But the good news is usually with crises, you emerge at a place based on where you were before the crisis. And we were in a really good place, University of Utah. I mean, it's all I keep hearing, from the president, from our athletic director, from the coaches, is we were in a good place before this crisis. And there's a lot of schools, teams, universities that weren't.
Right.
And that I think will be particularly harder because, hopefully we can get back to a really thriving place. So, that's what we'll be doing. And hopefully our, it's nice that our office is established, just like when, Lauren McCluskey lost her life, we had a established psychology and wellness office that students and friends and their team could reach out to in addition to the coaches. But, having an established office will help when these students come back because they know where to go for support.
Yeah, you mentioned the murder on campus of former track athlete Lauren McCluskey about a year and a half ago. Jonathan, would you say that was your most challenging stretch during your time at Utah, dealing with that and her teammates and coaches and people she was close to?
Absolutely. Probably for my career.
Yeah.
More generally. I mean, that was a unique time and a unique moment to reach out to everyone. And, it most certainly is still felt by everybody, and it still carries quite a effect in the track team, to our student athletes after that, to the larger university and to the community. So, to be honest with you, there's going to be athletes coming back that have lost family members from COVID. And so just the death and unexpected loss of anyone, be it a teammate to a grandfather, to a uncle, to a cousin, like those are realities that we're going to deal with. And we don't know when this is done. I mean, we're slowly opening up. Is there going to be, like you said, another surge? Who knows? But Utah's in a good place, University of Utah, and then the hospitals, to help the community. So,
you bring up a great point, Jonathan, that there will be loss, and there's going to be more loss down the road. I mean, for a student athlete coming back from home later this summer, this fall, they come back, and the reality is some are going to lose grandparents or family members after they come back here. Because of the coronavirus. I mean, unless we get a vaccine and it's mass produced quickly, that's the reality. This thing is going to hang around and cause more damage. I'm guessing, as we talk about the return, are you concerned about things like that really weighing on the minds of young people as they leave home and come back to us?
Well, I am, insofar as we're going to meet with each of the teams virtually before they come back to, see where they're at, to help normalize the process of coming back, because they may have unrealistic expectations about how it'll be, and they might, get back and just kind of feel like they landed on their feet or landed face first. So trying to connect with them, talk about what they're concerned about, what they're hoping for, what they're nervous about. And then once they get back here, we'll probably connect with the teams again. And how are you doing? Where are we at? How are you? And, some of them may talk about these exact things, that while I'm back, I miss my family. While I'm back, I'd rather be home because my grandpa's sick. So those are the things that are new, than how it used to be. And like you said, multiple calls a day, probably from family members. That's just going to have to be accepted, because there's nothing that's bad about that.
No, not at all. Not at all. Nope.
I don't want to pathologize anything like that kind of parenting right now, because, I watch my kids a lot. We don't leave our house if we're told not to leave our, like all that stuff is new. And so I think it'll be okay. And, within reason, that these kids have support right at their fingertips. But they may end up coming out more resilient than they were before. It sounds cliche, but it probably will happen.
Yep. You make a great point as we start to wrap things up here, talking to Jonathan Ravarino, Director of Psychology and Wellness. As I've watched various television shows and things on the internet, you'll hear people from older generations talk about, hey, we dealt with World War II or the Korean War or the Gulf War, or you mentioned 9/11 a while ago. It seems like every so often we have something that galvanizes a generation, defines a generation, and is that generation's struggle. And for all of us, this is going to be it. Everyone who's here during this period of time on planet Earth is going to remember what they went through. And you're right. People who've talked about other conflicts and things they dealt with, they said, hey, it made us stronger. It helped make us better as we got through it. And you can get through it because we did, and we can all do the same once again. I think the hard thing for right now has been, the things people use to help them cope with hard times, whether it's a job or a tough situation at home, have been taken away. I mean, there's no live concerts. There's no live sporting events. Right. You can't watch sports on television. A lot of the things that people use to help them get through their days or their weeks have been taken away with everything else. And I think that's been the hardest thing for people to deal with. So, Jonathan, as we sort of wrap up here, we'll have people listening who are athletes and coaches, but I know we have a lot of, fans of the U who listen to these. If you can maybe just give a few words of advice for people on how to deal with this current situation and get through it. I mean, with employment and unemployment and stresses at home and the uncertainty of what's going to happen and when this will end and what the world will look like when we get through this state. Any advice you can give to people that help them stay on the straight and narrow and keep their head up and keep moving forward in the days ahead?
Well, that's a big ask because I'm not entirely.
I saved it for the end for a reason, and hate to put you on the spot, but I thought if anyone could maybe give us some insight, it would be someone like you if you could pass something along.
Well, I think all those things you mentioned are huge, and each one of them probably deserves their own kind of nuance answer. But we know from psychological research that there's some things that you want in times of stress to do that are going to help you. The first one is just be kind to yourself. If you do nothing other than just accept the fact that this is hard, that, quiets the critic inside your mind that's telling you, it's not hard for Cindy. She's doing fine. Or, the neighbor's doing fine. Why can't I get out of bed? It's just, you have to be, accept where you're at. And this is hard. And then, in addition to acceptance of what you're feeling or what you're experiencing, you also have to commit to something each day. You have to have some purpose, and having an intention when you wake up, okay, I'm going to accomplish some things. It might look different every day, or it might feel like a lot of people say the Groundhog Day analogy of just everything feels the same,
Yep, I've heard a lot of that.
Weekends feel the same as weekdays and weekdays feel like weekends. So if you can create some structure with some stable, sleep cycles, that always helps, right?
Right.
And then, all of us sometimes, run into our own, what takes the edge off, whether it be sweets, whether it be alcohol, be, sleeping, things that poor coping, let's say. If you can reduce that, you don't have to be perfect, but just reduce to not fall into old patterns of smoking, things like that aren't really healthy for you in the long run. And then, see it as an opportunity to try something new. Like, what could I do today that's different than what I historically did? Maybe it's exercise, maybe it's eating a little healthier, maybe it's just using a new coping skill like, music, driving, meditation, different things. So just kind of being creative and flexible with this new normal, and then still trying to find ways to connect and relate to people, even though we're distancing. I think, embrace the fact that Zoom is there, and Zoom is not the best, but FaceTime, these things, but it's still something. And those are the real things. The emotions, have them or they'll have you. All emotions are okay. Don't get angry that you're sad. Just accept that sadness is okay, just like joy is okay. Mm-hmm. And then when it comes to some of your fear thoughts of like, oh, Is this going to get worse? Is this going to get worse? Think about talking with someone. Doesn't have to be a psychologist or mental health person. You can just talk to a friend, a partner. Write some of these thoughts down. That tends to externalize them from the swimming in your brain. Or try mindfulness meditation. I mean, the research is clear. It's real easy. You just learn how to practice some mindful meditation. There's lots of apps on it. It's just a quiet breathing, focusing on your breathing, and it quiets your mind. It helps your physiological system. It just helps everything. Your autoimmune kind of response to stress, helps your sleep. These are things you could just try now that you have some time.
Right.
And we're all in this together, so you don't have to be perfect, but one or two things coming out of this of new coping would probably be really good, Mike.
Absolutely.
For people. I'm doing it myself. It's not like I'm suggesting things. I can fall into going into the kitchen and eating every time I have a break. I didn't used to do that. So, setting some limits on what I'm eating, when I'm eating, that's something I'm doing too.
Yeah.
So,
I was thinking the other day, everyone talks about how things like this change you. And I thought, if we can all come through this and think about one thing we gave up that we are like, you know what, I don't need to do that anymore. Something totally. You've done new that you're like, you know what, I'm going to keep doing that. I'm going to do more of that I kind of stumbled upon this, and I'm going to continue. And maybe a third thing would be something you've always wanted to do that you haven't done and you can't do. And you're like, you know what, now that I have my opportunity, I'm going to do it. And maybe we can find three things that, or things out of those three categories that we take from this might be a good way to help us move forward. And at some point we'll be there. No one knows when the next phase will start of returning to life as we knew it and the new normal. But we'll get there. And thanks to people like you and your staff, we'll get there. So Jonathan, I appreciate the time. Everyone sees the athletes on the floor, on television, in competition, and the coaches are front and center, but people like yourself and your staff are some of the unsung heroes behind the scenes. And you do so much for so many that doesn't, hit the newspaper or television or the websites that is so valuable. So I appreciate your time and your insight, and Jonathan, all the best to you.
Hey, thanks, Mike. Really appreciate it. And, go Utes, right?
Go Utes. We will have sports again at some point. Be positive. Jonathan, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right.
Absolutely.
That's Dr. Jonathan Ravarino, the Director of Psychology and Wellness for Utah Athletics. Back to wrap things up in just a moment.
Stay connected by searching for Utah Athletics on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Now back to more Utes Insider, presented by Pepsi.
What a great conversation with Dr. Jonathan Ravarino, the Director of Psychology and Wellness for Utah Athletics. And as I said, that's a little bit of a different show than we'll have most weeks. Most of the weeks it's going to be reliving some great memories with former and current athletes and coaches, some insight on what's going on now in Utah Athletics. But Jonathan playing such a pivotal role under normal circumstances, helping our student athletes and coaches perform at their best. He's helped the staff as well deal with some challenging situations. And I just thought his insight would be great. And it turned out to be just the case. Jonathan, a wonderful guy who is really committed to his work and works tirelessly, as does his entire staff, helping our student athletes and coaches and staff with mental health and some great advice. The one thing I took from this was his thoughts of have your emotions or they will have you. And that's great advice no matter what the circumstances are, whether you're in the workplace, whether you're a competitive athlete yourself, whether you're dealing with challenging times personally or professionally. Have your emotions or they will have you. Some great advice there. And he said, really in this current state, remember to be kind for yourself. Don't worry about what your neighbor down the street or whether another family member in or out of your home is doing and how well they're doing. If you're not there, don't worry about it. Be kind to yourself. Realize these are challenging times. Every day have a purpose, create some structure, and try some new things and try to really better yourself during these times, because at some point we're all going back to maybe not totally what we did before. We'll have, as they say, the new normal, thrust upon us, but we will all go back to somewhat of a normal life at some point. And as we've seen with previous generations who dealt with world wars and 9/11 and other things, this challenge will define us as a society around the world, and how we come out of it will help us deal with the next challenge and the challenges to come. So some great words of advice from Jonathan Ravarino. Well, if you have some suggestions for guests, reach out to us on Twitter at Utah Athletics. Let us know who you'd like to hear from. We'll reach out to those individuals and see if we can book them for current shows. That will do it for us for right now. Thank you to Michael Gilliland on the technical side, and thanks to our social media and media relations staff at the U as well for all their help in promoting our show. That will do it for us in this edition of Utes Insider presented by Pepsi. I'm Mike Lagerschultz. Until next time, so long, everybody.
This has been Utes Insider presented by Pepsi. To hear more episodes of this show and other Utah Athletics podcasts, search for them on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube.